The studio lights cut through the air like spotlights in a theater, illuminating every movement, every twitch of expression. The audience settled into silence, the kind of stillness that comes before a storm. At the center of the stage sat Rick Scott, his posture rigid, his smile practiced, his eyes already searching for the moment to strike. It didn't take long. As Crockett began outlining her point, Scott leaned forward, seizing his chance. His voice, sharp and dripping with disdain, sliced across her words. "Congresswoman, maybe if you focused less on emotions and more on facts, you'd actually contribute something useful here." The jab wasn't subtle. It was designed to belittle, to cast her as an outsider unfit for the stage he believed belonged to men like him. A faint smirk curled at the corner of his mouth. The satisfaction of a man convinced he'd landed the winning blow. What Crockett said next wasn't just a comeback. It was a clapback that would shake the internet within minutes. This wasn't just a clash of personalities. It was a collision of values. The debate that night was supposed to center on justice, fairness, and the direction of American leadership. But with a single dismissive swipe, Rick Scott revealed more than he intended. His words didn't just diminish Crockett, they represented the old guard's instinct to silence voices that refused to bow down. Scott had spent decades perfecting the polished smirk of someone who believed experience alone gave him authority. To him, interruption was dominance. To Crockett, it was proof of why new leadership mattered. Her very presence on that stage symbolized a shift, not just in politics, but in who gets to speak with authority in America. The stakes had risen higher than Scott ever realized. The clash didn't stay confined to the studio. It was about to explode across the nation. Rick Scott didn't arrive at this stage by accident. His career had been carefully built, brick by brick, on polished talking points and a carefully cultivated image of authority. He had the resume, the resources, and the reputation of a man who always managed to keep himself at the top. But behind that facade lay a history that critics knew all too well. A pattern of arrogance, tone-deaf decisions, and a belief that power gave him the right to dismiss others. From his days as a businessman accused of turning a blind eye to scandals, to his time in office where he often brushed off criticism with a wave of the hand, Scott had perfected the role of the unshaken Goliath. He wore criticism like a badge, proof in his mind that he was untouchable. To him, challengers weren't equals. They were obstacles, easily sidestepped or silenced. Jasmine Crockett's rise was never about privilege. It was about persistence. Long before she ever sat on a national debate stage, she was the voice for those who were ignored, underestimated, or dismissed outright. Born outside the circles of entrenched power, she carved her path the hard way, through grit, through study, and through the kind of resilience that only comes from being told no far too many times. As a lawyer, she made her name defending people who couldn't afford anyone else. She walked into courtrooms where the odds were stacked, armed not with wealth or connections, but with a sharp mind and a sharper tongue. That reputation followed her into politics. Crockett didn't just speak, she struck. And her words carried the weight of authenticity, rooted in the lived experiences of communities long excluded from the national conversation. And in that moment, facing Scott's arrogance, she was more than just a congresswoman holding her ground. She was the only one with the poise, the fire, and the truth to flip the script. Rick Scott wasn't finished. The first jab had given him confidence, and now he pressed harder, his voice rising with the edge of a man who believed volume could substitute for logic. He leaned into the microphone, cutting across Crockett's words, tossing out statistics and buzzwords, with the arrogance of someone convinced the audience would take his side simply because he demanded it. "Congresswoman," he sneered, "this isn't about feelings. It's about reality. And the reality is, people like you are all talk and no results." The remark hung in the air, thick with dismissal. A few in the studio shifted uncomfortably. It wasn't just policy anymore. The exchange had grown personal. Scott's tone wasn't aimed at debate. It was meant to diminish, to assert dominance, to put Crockett in her place. But Crockett didn't flinch. She sat tall, her eyes narrowing just slightly, her hands folded in calm composure. When she did respond, her words came measured, crisp, and precise, each one a scalpel cutting through the noise. Scott was trying to create. Where he raised his voice, she lowered hers, forcing the room to lean in, to listen. The room was still, the air charged with anticipation. Rick Scott leaned back in his chair, smirking as though he had already won. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't rattled. She waited, letting the silence stretch, letting his arrogance linger, just long enough for the weight of what was about to come next. When she spoke, her tone was steady, controlled, but sharp enough to slice through the studio air. Senator Scott, you say this isn't about feelings, but let me ask you this. When families in your state lost everything to floods, to hurricanes, to economic collapse, were they supposed to solve it with a spreadsheet? Or do they deserve leaders with compassion and backbone, not excuses? The audience gasped, a low ripple moving across the studio. Scott's smirk faltered. He tried to interject, but Crockett's voice only grew firmer. You wanted to dismiss me, Senator. But tonight, you didn't just dismiss me, you dismissed every person who's tired of being talked over and ignored. And let me be crystal clear, we're done being silent. We're done waiting. And no amount of shouting will drown us out. The line hit like a lightning strike. Gasps turned into applause. The studio buzzed with electricity as Scott sank deeper into his chair, visibly unsettled, stripped of the swagger he had carried in. The debate wasn't just over. It had transformed into a viral moment, a cultural flashpoint, and Jasmine Crockett had delivered the mic drop, heard across the nation. The debate may have ended on stage, but online, it was just beginning. Within minutes, clips of Jasmine Crockett's takedown lit up every platform. Hashtags surged to the top of trending lists. Your Crockett clapback, their leaders with dignity, and the brutal on Scott Stammer. TikTok was flooded with edits of the moment. Slow-motion replays of her final line, set to dramatic music, racking up millions of views overnight. Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook became battlegrounds of commentary. Political analysts marveled at her composure. A masterclass in debate discipline, one commentator wrote. Activists hailed her as the kind of leadership America desperately needs. Even late-night hosts couldn't resist. Rick Scott brought his voice. Jasmine Crockett brought the receipts. One joked to roaring applause. For Jasmine Crockett, though, the night was more than a win. It was a launchpad. Her name wasn't just in headlines. It was in history's margins, written bold. And this was only the beginning. When the noise of the debate settled and the trending hashtags slowed their climb, something deeper remained. Jasmine Crockett had done more than dismantle. Rick Scott, in a televised clash, she had reframed what victory in politics truly looks like. It wasn't about who shouted the loudest or who could score the most sound bites. It was about who could carry themselves with dignity when tested, who could hold truth steady against arrogance. Crockett reminded viewers that politics is more than theater. It is a reflection of values, and in that moment, she embodied values that resonate at the core of the American story. Fairness, justice, resilience. She didn't match Scott's volume. She matched him with clarity. She didn't descend into insult. She rose with substance. That choice mattered, because while insults fade, integrity endures. By standing firm and speaking with conviction, Crockett turned a clash into a parable. Arrogance falls, dignity stands. And as the lights dimmed and the viral clips continued to spread, one truth lingered. This was not just about one debate or one politician. It was about us, about what kind of leaders we choose to uplift, and what kind of future we demand. Because when dignity speaks, America listens. Rick Scott tried to overpower the moment with arrogance, but Jasmine Crockett flipped the script and left him in regret. What millions witnessed wasn't just a clash of personalities. It was a reminder that authenticity will always outshine ego. Scott's insults dissolved into stammers, while Crockett's calm precision turned into history's highlight reel. The lesson is undeniable. Arrogance always crumbles before truth, and dignity is louder than any insult. That's why this moment went viral, not because of scandal, but because it struck a chord with everyone who's ever been underestimated. So here's the call. Don't just watch this story, be part of it. Subscribe, share, and spread the word. Stand with dignity, just as Jasmine Crockett did. Because every time someone like her stands tall, it's not just a win in a debate. It's a win for all of us.